Be the reason someone smiles. Be the reason someone feels loved and believes in the goodness in people. Roy T. Bennett.
Adam Smith. To feel much for others and little for ourselves, to restrain our selfishness and exercise our benevolent affections, constitute the perfect of human nature.
In 1985, I had one of the scariest experiences of my life. I was 14 years old and a camper at one of my favorite places in the entire world, Camp Artaban. It was Monday, July 1st, Canada Day, and we were 3 days into a week-long camp. It was about 3 p.m. in the afternoon, on the Monday when we heard the fire alarm ring out throughout the camp. The sound was unmistakable. It was a siren that you had to crank, and when you cranked it fast enough, the sound could be deafening. Now, to be honest, none of us thought too much of it, as Monday was often the day for weekly fire drills. The students and camp staff, all the staff in those days were volunteers, mostly teenagers and a few adults. We all started meandering down to the campfire site near the beach as per instructions. It was not until I turned around to see large flames shooting out from behind the dining hall that I began to realize that this was no drill.
I'm fascinated by people's flaws and delusions, all the messy bits of human nature we all try to pretend we don't have. Hattie Morahan.
More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent and all will be lost. Charlie Chaplin, from The Great Dictator.
Our pace hurried as we gathered in our cabin groups at the campfire site for a head count. My memories after that point get a bit fuzzy, mostly just snippets, but here's what I remember. The fire brigade at camp consisted of the permanent staff, affectionately known as Permies. They consisted of about 10 young adults, aged between 18 and 25. There was the executive director and the caretaker. You see, the camp was on an island that was only accessible by boat, so there was no fire station. These people, barely out of their teens, were tasked with keeping this massive blaze that engulfed one of our buildings from getting out of control until the helicopters used to fight forest fires, arrived. Most of them I knew personally, as they were family friends. I remember my brother tirelessly trying to keep up our spirits by leading camp songs at the fire pit. He did this until his voice went hoarse. He did this while his clothes and record collection were most likely destroyed in the blaze. I remember us having to move from the campfire site to the end of the government dock, actually this dock right here, as a safety measure. I remember a large array of boats in the bay, boats which had absolutely no connection to the camp, hovering close to the government dock, ready to evacuate us if necessary. After 2 very scary hours, the heli-tac arrived and doused the fire, and half the buildings in the camp. The fire was out, and we were safe. Before all the yachts and sailboats left, they left us stacks of snacks and soft drinks as a bit of a parting gift.
In the end, you have to choose whether or not to trust someone. Sophie Kinsella.
If we could read the secret history of our enemies, we should find in each man's life sorrow and suffering enough to disarm all hostility. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
It was only after the fact that I learned how close we were to disaster. This here is the dining hall. Behind the dining hall were 4 large propane tanks located about there. The fire was raging right about here. If they blew up, half the camp would be destroyed. The caretaker had to drive the tractor multiple times through the fire to get the propane tanks out of harm's way. The firefighters who arrived by helicopter and water taxi a couple of hours later commended the Permies. Again, people barely out of their teens who had no firefighting experience, for the courage and quick thinking. Their efforts literally saved half the buildings and part of the forest all around from going up into flames.
Woodrow Wilson once said, "There is no higher religion than human service. To work for the common good is the greatest creed."
One of the great philosophical debates in human history has centered around our human nature. And why not? The answer to that question literally impacts everything: economics, politics, religion, you name it. The prevailing wisdom in recent years has been that human nature is not good. Deep down, we are selfish, self-centered. We can be cruel, heartless, and uncaring. But is that really the case? Let's go back to the story I just told you. I think it paints a very different view of human nature. Consider the Permies, who demonstrated nothing but courage and selflessness. They could have panicked. They could have left the fire to rage out of control, but they didn't. And in the process, may have saved all our lives. And they even provided dinner. While the fire was raging, the dinner they had prepared had just been put in the oven to cook. By the time the fire was out, it was cooked to perfection, and we ate at the end of the dock. My brother had every reason to sulk and feel sorry for himself. Instead, he put every ounce of his energy and his voice to keeping people's spirits up. The yachties, as we used to call them, they did not have to show up or stick around. They, in a sense, were in harm's way as well. But they stayed nonetheless and gave us a ton of food before they left. And how about all of us at the camp? Yes, we were scared, but we didn't panic. We didn't turn on each other. We supported each other. We sang songs, we told jokes, whatever it took to get us through. And here's the crazy part. That week was one of the best weeks I ever had at camp. We had almost no water left in the tanks due to fighting the fires, so no showers. We had to wash in the ocean. Yet there was a special bond that was formed during that camp that I will never forget. This does not sound like the nasty, selfish behavior that we are told about when discussing human nature.
Earth provides enough to satisfy every man's need, but not every man's greed. Mahatma Gandhi.
The story has played out again and again and again throughout history. When disaster strikes, it is not every person for themselves. The response is one of care, compassion, support, and encouragement every single time. 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, and many others during the hurricane season, earthquakes in Christchurch, Japan, and Puerto Rico, 2005 tsunami that impacted so much of the South Pacific, the recent wildfires in northern Alberta, California, and Australia. All of them, the response was one of care and compassion. It happens on a personal scale too. Some of you may have heard of the bystander effect, except it is not quite accurate. When there's proximity, a situation where people can respond, and when there is real danger, people do respond. In fact, people respond quickly, collectively, and as a result, very effectively. Now some may ask, what about the stories we hear about mass hysteria, looting, things like that? Well, according to research, this is the exception, not the rule. The truth is that media will often pick up on these isolated incidences and exaggerate them. Then the stories take on a life of their own. In response, panic and fear can set in. But this is where it gets interesting. There's only one section of the population who really tends to panic: those with wealth and those with power. In fact, it has a name. It's called elite panic. Some of you may still not be convinced because you keep hearing all the stories and research and books that talk about the thin veneer of civilization, that underneath it all, we're actually really just selfish and cruel and self-centered? But guess who's reinforcing these ideas? Those with wealth and those with power. Truth is, they reinforce a negative view of human nature because they have an agenda. They want to stay in power. And by staying in power, it reinforces the cycle of oppression, white supremacy, and patriarchy. And frankly, the media and social media, they only make it worse by over-reporting these inaccurate and damaging misperceptions.
Everyone is a moon and has a dark side which he never shows to anybody.
So what does this have to do with us? Well, let's be honest, these struggles still continue. The global pandemic is not going away anytime soon, and its impact continues to be felt most by women, people of color, and the vulnerable workforce. White supremacy and patriarchy are still seen in our systems and structures, and they need to be named and dismantled. Given the impact of climate change, disasters, both natural and human-made, will be an ongoing reality, which we have to face. In social and political discourse, healthy debate and dialogue has devolved into dehumanization and name-calling. This has led to civil unrest and conflict. The danger of a negative view of human nature gives us the excuse to give up. Well, I don't want to give up. I refuse to give up. In our response to these issues, we have a choice. We can choose to believe in the thin veneer of society, that deep down people are greedy, mean, and selfish. And guess what? That is probably what we will see. Or we can recognize that humanity is in fact good, decent, compassionate. And guess what? That is what we will experience. This is not a new idea. Listen to these two readings. The first is from the Quran, and the second is from the Hebrew Bible.
The following is a reading from the Quran, Surah 90, 1-10, otherwise known as Surat Al-Balad. The reading now begins in both Arabic and English translation. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the entirely merciful, the especially merciful. La uqsimu bihadha al-balad. I swear by this city. Wa anta hillu bihadha al-balad. And you, O Muhammad, are free of restriction in this city. Wa walidin wima walad. And by the Father and that which was born of him. Laqad khalaqna al-insanu fi kabad. We have certainly created man into hardship. Ayahsib an lan yaqdiru alayhi ahad. Does he think that no one has power over him? Yaqul ahlaktu malan lubada. He says, I have spent wealth in abundance. Ayahsibu an lam yarahu ahad. Does he think that no one sees him? Alam naj'al lahu aynayn. Did we not give him 2 eyes? Wa lisanan wa shafatayn. And a tongue and 2 lips. Wa hadaynahu an najdayn. And have shown him the 2 ways. Sadaqallahu al-Azim. God Almighty has spoken the truth. The reading ends here.
A reading from Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 to 20. See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding to you today, by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live.
Perhaps even more succinctly, we can hear it in this parable of unknown origin.
The story of the 2 wolves. A grandfather is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside of me, he said to the boy. It is a terrible fight, and it is between 2 wolves. One is evil. Anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. He continued, the other is good. He is joy, peace, love, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside of you and inside of every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? The grandfather simply replied, the one you feed.
For millennia, we have been told that the view and response to human nature is a choice that has consequences. So let's make the choice to assume that people are kind, caring, and compassionate. Let's make the choice to assume that people in the end are here to help and support one another. Let's make the choice to assume that when the chips are down, we can count on our family, friends, classmates, colleagues, and strangers to be there with a helping hand and a listening ear. If we do this, maybe, just maybe, that is what we will experience, and we will get through this together.
In spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the sufferings of millions, and yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come right, that the cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. A quote from Anne Frank's diary, The Diary of a Young Girl.